Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 425 show. Today, we have a fantastic episode with 4 members of our team to talk all about how to implement a zero trust workshop. I know this has been a hot topic for quite some time, but we're looking forward to breaking it down and giving y'all some helpful resources on how to get started. Today, we have Tarek, David, Clay, and Enrique joining us, and we're going to first hand it off to Tarek to talk about why zero trust.
Access and secure access to your organization. It is now listed, and that's not just a buzzword by certain vendors or analysts. It is now listed as the prescribed approach by NIST, by the Department of Defense, and the Open Group. There are defined standards for it now, and as we'll see in the next slide, basically even our own customer leaders are saying that they're now embarking on a zero trust journey. So this is research we did about 2 years ago that shows top of mind for security leaders in the industry among all our customers. So this is not vendors, this is actually what the customers think, and 38% of them, or 40% of them, were on basically trying to implement a zero trust journey. If we move from there, just a refresher of what is meant when we say zero trust, because it's very easy to kind of get caught up in, oh, what do you mean? You have to trust something. Yes, you do. It's zero implicit trust, zero assumed trust. That in the older systems, for example, when you got through the network perimeter, it was assumed that you're authenticated, that your device is domain joined, that you're supposed to be talking to the domain controller. None of these things in a zero trust architecture are true. In zero trust architecture, when you get to the app and you try to talk to it, you have to present proofs. These proofs are validated every time. And so that's one of the things that we wanted to clarify. It's not about the zero trust of everything. It's about zero assumed trust that you explicitly verify. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. So the core principles of zero trust in general are verify explicitly. So none of this assumed trust we mentioned. The other one is use the least privilege. So always try to right size the access permissions, the roles, the power that you give people and applications to the right kind of scopes and permissions. And most importantly, another element of zero trust is assume compromise, meaning assume that a bad guy got through your first line of defense. What else would find them? Where would you find them? Other than SecOps, is there another gate they have to go through? Other than, oh, post-compromise, now we're trying to find them. And so if there is someone who got through your network gate, can you catch them the identity layer? If they got through identity layer, can you catch them the devices layer, and so forth? And the most important principle that is not written in zero trust, that is very important, especially for security professionals to remember, is enable the business. It's implied, but basically you can't zero trust to the point of shutting down the business or putting gates and locks everywhere to the point where people can't get things done because people will work around security. So moving on. So why do a zero trust kind of workshop? What are we looking for? This is an example of how zero trust is both, on the one hand, a standard. So this is the actual collaboration myself and Clay worked on, and Enrique as well, with NIST, in which we worked on their Zero Trust Lab. This is a mapping of capabilities to NIST Zero Trust Reference Architecture. 1800-53 is the publication. Mapping to 800-207, the reference architecture, for those of you who want the numbers. And as you can see, there's a lot of products and a lot of things to do to implement that reference architecture. So one of the good things about going with the Microsoft products, although we're not here to sell necessarily, is that, as you can see, we have great coverage across the architecture in terms of proof points of policy decision points or policy enforcement points, policy governance, transparency, analytics, all that stuff. So but it takes a lot. So let's talk about that even more. The challenge that most customers tell us about, so in all our journeys, me and my colleagues here, right, is that they usually start from something like this. This is the Microsoft Zero Trust Reference Architecture in our website, right? And that's a very beautiful picture, very simple picture, very easy, succinct to capture. Unfortunately, it doesn't capture the complexity and the amount of work needed to capture through the journey. If you actually start looking at what does that look like fully deployed, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that it looks like this. For example, on a Microsoft stack. This is a bazillion things you have to do. And of course, it still has the old Azure AD name and older products. But the intent here was to show you, like, this is what a fully deployed stack, for example, with Microsoft products would look like. And that's a lot of work. And you don't know which one goes first to make the other one work. And so to go further than that, yeah, it's just putting something on top of something is not as easy as just turn on the two features. It's actually a bunch of steps and preparations. This is one angle, for example. This is just a devices angle, and just trying to implement certain aspects of it. And these are a bunch of steps that you have to do to get there. So that is kind of the pain points that we hear from customers all the time. Where do I start my zero trust journey? What steps do I take next? If I did MFA, what do I do after MFA? How many steps are there? How do I measure progress? Am I 30% of the way done? How do I reflect to my leadership that our zero trust journey is halfway complete, almost done, just starting? So, and we're here to help you with that. So that's the good news. So first of all, an announcement. All of you, this website is live as of this week. Basically, if you go to aka.ms/ZT workshop, you'll see a live, beautiful website with our dear beloved webmaster. Actually, David is going to go after me. He did not design all the graphics, but he does run the website, which we will we'll provide you this kit. So if you go to the next slide, what is it? It's really a tool that we built that helps you reason about the steps necessary to deploy a zero trust journey across the main pillars. So it's actually aligned to each pillar, first of all, which means the area of ownership on the customer side as well, right? So identity, devices, data, infra, those are the general areas that customers have teams around. And so it's not aligned to Microsoft products. So we're not saying, oh, MDI or Entra only. We're actually trying to talk about the identity pillar as a whole. And then the ultimate goal is to help you use that tool to create a detailed, customized journey for your own zero trust journey, and then allow you to measure the progress over time. We do highlight scenarios in the identity pillar. For example, we highlight scenarios that interact with data or with devices. In the devices, same thing, so that you can also see how because zero trust is not about silos. It's not about doing identity alone and devices alone. Remember the famous quote from John Lambert, our right? That attackers think in graphs and defenders think in lists. We're not trying to tell you, secure your identities separately from your devices. The whole point is to actually help you connect these areas together. If you own the Microsoft stack or E3, E5, that kind of stuff, then this will definitely help you fully utilize what you bought. And then ultimately, our goal is to help you improve your end-to-end security posture. That's kind of why we're doing this at the end of the day, to help people. You can totally do the zero trust workshop with third-party products completely. So we're launching. We've done this with pilots and private previews with 15 plus customers. The net promoter score of the workshop is 4.9 out of 5. That's how likely the customer is to recommend it to other colleagues at the customer or to other customers. We've done it with partners. We have partners trained on this. And we will have a blog coming out later this week or next week that will actually have some partner quotes in it that announces this. But we just kind of wanted to show like this is tried and true, and we have some really good feedback from it as well. So we'd love to share it with all of you. So what does it look like? So when you go to the website, you will see a beautiful website that talks you through why zero trust and so forth, and then it will offer you to download the zero trust workshop tool. This is the tool, and this is, for example, the identity pillar. And so the first thing we want to highlight here is that it's aligned on pillars, as you see down there. So you see identity, devices, apps, data. You kind of work through the pillar on the area that you want. You can tell when you're doing a pillar, we don't recommend you do it all by just identity people alone. You should have people from devices and network who are also involved. But this allows them to kind of reason about one problem space independently. So next, you see that the rows in the spreadsheet will be about the actual areas of or sub areas of that pillar, right? So users and groups, how to do identity, how to do zero trust for users and groups, how to do zero trust for apps, how to do zero trust for privileged admins and so forth. Then we move from that and we try to give, the columns are really what you should help you kind of reason about what you should do first, then, and the next. So it helps you with, for example, do you even have a conditional access posture? What is your conditional access posture? That is a more important question than go apply conditional access policies everywhere. So we kind of help you reason through it. Each of these If we move to the next one, if each of these boxes is actually not just a box, if you click on the box, it takes you to an article that has guidance that explains what this is about. What are you trying to do in this box or at that point? So we're not just leaving you out there with a bunch of slogans and feature names. We're actually giving you these boxes. And then finally, each of the boxes, you can mark it as you're having the discussion from first to then to next through the rows. You can mark where you are. So you can say, I'm, for example, for this migrate moving joiner lever workflows to Entra, I am done. I am not started. I am not planning on doing this ever, or I have completed it, or I'm blocked. I'm using a third party, right? So this allows you to capture where are you in this, and when you hit save on that file, now that's your state. That's yours where you are with this piece, and you can come back to it later. That's kind of how the workshop as a whole works. And so with that, that's kind of overview of how it works and why we did it. Now we're going to walk you through each of these pillars and what they look like. So I'll hand it off to my dear colleague, Dave Hoerster.
Hey, thanks, Tarek. All right. So what we'll do is we'll talk to myself, Clay, Enrique. We'll talk to each of the three main pillars that we're launching: identity, devices, and data, and just kind of run through like who should you bring to these pillar workshop meetings, how long should you plan for them to take, and just kind of walk through what's being covered in those different pillars. So from the identity workshop perspective, again, my name's David Hoerster, part of the CXE architecture team for identity. From a stakeholders perspective, you should really bring in, for identity, your identity and access management team, your leaders, your architects, your operations folks. Try to bring in your security architects and operations folks. Generally, it really helps to have someone there also from governance, maybe a few folks there, because it seems like sometimes, at least in the workshops that we've delivered, governance and some of the IM folks, may have different plans. So it's really good to kind of bring them all together. And that's actually one of the beauties of the workshop too, is that different teams start to talk to each other, and it's a lot of learning. Also, bring in infrastructure and your device management folks, and if possible, being able to bring in leadership, so your CISO or IT director, just so you have that sponsorship type of buy-in and sort of the blessing from your leadership in terms of the directions that are being taken in the workshops, decisions being made. So that's what we generally recommend from an attendance perspective. When you're planning out your workshop from a time perspective, for identity in general, we plan about a 4-hour block of time, and you can split it into two-hour sessions if needed. But we tend to try to look for a 4-hour workshop for identity, and that's really taking about an hour and a half for applications. And so that's obviously it's the first part of the identity pillar. So there's a little bit of learning. It's trying to get into that rhythm of walking through each one of the roadmap items. So it sometimes takes maybe a little bit longer just to kind of get warmed up for everybody. But then users and groups and operations take about an hour each. And as we'll see, devices is a pretty light section in the identity pillar. Really, that's covered in much more detail in the devices pillar specifically. So we allocate about a half hour for devices. Now, looking at each one of the sections for identity, first up is the apps section. This is what Tarek was showing in his section. So that first row there is designing your conditional access policy posture. But really, the apps section, what you're doing in your workshop is really facilitating conversations, right? You're walking through each one of these boxes, these roadmap items, and trying to get a sense of where is our organization in terms of this particular roadmap item, like what's our stance, and what are our plans around that. And so we definitely that conversation kind of focuses in on each one of those roadmap items. The other thing to really kind of call out too is that each roadmap item, if it requires special licensing, like a P1 or a P2, or maybe another service like Entra Domain Services, we try to call those out in the roadmap items too. So you'll see little pills that say like P1, P2, and so on throughout the different workshop pillars. So we want to make sure that everyone's kind of aware, just from a licensing perspective, what might be required for those particular areas. Now in the app session specifically, there's really kind of two main points that we try to focus on. One is really using Entra for SSO, and it's really instrumental because it allows conditional access, which is kind of that glue that kind of brings everything together inside of a zero trust environment. So, utilizing your risk signals for adaptive policies and its device states, and using authentication strengths, across the board. And then also, it also kind of highlights sort of a migration path from on-prem up into more, enter a cloud-based type of applications. Moving on to users and groups. Again, it's really the very similar principles for that you had in applications. Here we're generally kind of running a couple things in parallel, really kind of moving towards a much more passwordless type of approach for your users rather than more traditional, just passwords. But then also highlighting kind of the combination of, moving provisioning from on-prem up into the cloud, and then also kind of mixing together or joining together kind of governance along with provisioning. So that's kind of a key element to kind of implement that least privilege and assume compromise principles of zero trust. And it kind of just reduces and controls that surface area that could be exploited if something bad were to happen. And then the last two sections of the identity pillar, first off is that light touch devices section, and really just talking about, interjoining devices and things along those lines. And then from an operations perspective, it's really important area because really here we're talking about, your strategy around PIM or privileged access, workload identities, security operations, really locking down your tenant and making sure that, you can handle really controlling configuration changes in your environment. So just looking at the zero trust principles in general in relation to the identity pillar, from a verify explicitly perspective, we're really focusing on conditional access policies, MFA, and things along those lines. With the least privilege use, we're focusing on PIM and access reviews and access packages. So really just reducing the amount of privilege that someone has and only enabling that for the least amount of time that they absolutely need it. And then lastly, with assumed breach, really taking advantage of identity protection and the risk detections that are available, excuse me, in identity protection with Enter ID. So with that, that's a really brief overview of the identity pillar. Hopefully, looking forward to you checking it out. I'm going to turn it over to Clay, and he'll talk to the devices pillar.
Thanks, David. Hey, everyone. Clay Taylor. I'm based out of Redmond, and I'm part of the Intune CXE team. I'm an architect in that area, and so I'm here to talk to you about the devices pillar. Very excited about this. I've been walking through these workshops with multiple customers as we get ready to launch, and they have just been going exceptionally well. We're getting just overwhelmingly positive feedback, and so just want to kind of talk to you about how I give the devices pillar workshop and a few things for you to keep in mind. Next slide. So who should attend the workshop? Much like the identity side, it's going to be your MDM admin instead of your identity admins, your security, architect, and ops folks. It's very good to have them on the call or in the room when you're going through this. Your conditional access admin, just because conditional access to me is kind of the cornerstone of Microsoft's zero trust story. And it's, even though, Intune is actually doing the compliance check, we're sending those signals to Intra and conditional access in order to actually make the determination of whether or not a device gets access or a user gets access to an app or not. Also, governance and risk. I found that it's always good to have them in the room if you are, going through the risks of these items. It's always good to have them there to say, hey, you know what? This is something we should turn on, even if it might have a small impact on end user productivity or on the business. It's always great to have them in the room to make that determination of, hey, is this risk, is it worth turning this on because of the risk that this particular item poses. And I also like to have the CISO and IT director in the room if possible, mostly on things like decision making. If you're showing that you have multiple products that could be eliminated by moving to something like Intune Suite, for example. If you're marking a bunch of items as using a third party, it's great to have them in the room because it allows them to make that determination of, hey, you know what, why are we spending all this extra money on all these third party tools when we could just move over to Intune Suite or Intra Suite and have cost savings. And next slide. When it comes to how long the workshop takes, I will tell you that the devices section is probably going to take you more time than the others possibly combined. I just gave one of these workshops yesterday with a customer, and in 2 hours we made it through like 3 lines of the Windows section. And in the devices workshop, we have Windows, we have MAM for iOS, we have MAM for Android, we have MDM for iOS and Android, we have Mac, we have Mac OS, and we have operations. And the Windows section is absolutely going to take the most time. I always like to start there just because it does take the most time. And I usually start with a 2-hour workshop or a 2-hour window, and then we'll add time as needed and meet an additional day for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours just to finish up Windows and then move on to the other sections. I will say that the other sections don't take nearly as long as Windows, but they could, just depending on how good the conversation is. And I've had workshops where there's been so much back and forth and so much great conversation with customers that it does sometimes take hours for each of these sections. But this is just kind of a guideline. So what I always like to say to customers when we start these workshops is, some of these items might not seem like zero trust items to you when you start looking at the spreadsheet. But when you start applying this lens, the zero trust lens of, verify explicitly, use least privilege access, and assume breach, almost all of them will start to make a lot more sense as to why they're part of the zero trust workshop. And I always say, for each of these items, here's how you apply the zero trust lens. For example, verify explicitly, that's going to be your conditional access and compliance policies. For use least privilege access, we're going to be looking at things like intra-device and user groups, mobile application management, and role-based access controls. For assume breach, we're going to be looking at things like device configurations, security baselines, and then Intune's integration with Defender for Endpoint. Next slide. As I said, I like to start with Windows, and I just want to point out, especially if you're a delivery partner or someone that's actually walking through these with customers, one of our biggest pushes on the Intune side lately has been around the path to cloud native, or Intra only joined with Intune only managed for your devices. This workshop is an absolutely perfect way for you to have that conversation with customers. When you start walking through each of these items, you're going to see that it's going to give you the ability to actually take notes and figure out, hey, what is it that's blocking this customer? What other information do they need? Are there items that they just need to start greenfield on, like especially when looking at things like migrating your group policy objects over from SCCM to Intune and Windows CSPs? Then it actually lets you have that conversation of, hey, are you really using all these GPOs? Should you just start fresh? If they are using GPOs that are unsupported, please, pass that list on to me personally if you want to. But we are trying to make sure that we're hitting all the high spots and making sure that at least the most important GPOs are covered with CSPs. But this tool gives you this timeline view of being able to walk through each of these steps and figure out exactly where your customer may be blocked and have that conversation of, hey, we really do need you to start looking at this path to cloud native. Next slide. I do want to call out, I mentioned taking notes. I just like to point out that there's a couple ways to take notes. I personally prefer to use comments. So you can just click on one of the boxes and add a comment. It will then allow you to type in your comment there and then have the side pane when you're done to basically compile all of your notes. However, I know David, for example, likes to use notes and likes to use little sticky notes, which once again, you just tap the box and click notes up top, and it allows you to take notes on each one of these items individually, which is a great way for you to follow up, in 6 months as well, and say, hey, this is where we were, and then take another note about where you are today. And next slide. And finally, just want to call out that, as you go through the workshop, you'll see that some of these items are tagged as suite. That means that they require Intune suite. There are also some boxes that say P2 and suite, and those are the ones that are available in both the Intune P2 SKU as well as the suite SKU. I did see a question in chat earlier around, do we call out the items that are only available for business premium? And the answer is no. We actually use E3 as our baseline. And so we just basically called out things that require P2 or suite or an additional SKU as far as licensing goes. And finally, Intune Suite is one of the newest product areas for Intune. We've added a lot of new functionality, and we really built these functions based on zero trust principles. So for Verify Explicitly, things like Remote Help, Cloud PKI have really been popular with customers. For least privilege access, we have Endpoint Privilege Management and Tunnel for MAM. And finally, Assume Breach, we've added Advanced Analytics and Enterprise Application Management. So as you go through these items, just once again, think of these with a zero trust lens. And I like to have that conversation with customers and say, hey, these may have been some gaps that you had in before, or you might have been using a third party before. Think about how Microsoft and the Intune Suite can help you close these gaps based on zero trust principles. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Enrique.
Hello, everyone. I'm Enrique Sagesse. I'm a principal program manager with the data security team at Microsoft. I'm part of the team that builds the products in the Purview suite, and I'm specialized in the information protection space, which means that I focus on the MIP, data loss prevention, sensitivity labels, inside the risk management products, and other compliance capabilities. Next slide. So just like the other pillars, this workshop needs to be attended by some critical stakeholders. Obviously, the information protection architects and officers, people in charge of information protection. And unlike the other pillars, the data security space is not consistently implemented across organizations. Some teams leave data security to the individual workloads, for example, to the SharePoint admins. Some organizations have information protection officers. Some organizations have it as part of their compliance team. So you need to make sure that those teams are invited and form a critical part of this workshop. In particular, compliance officers in any regulated company will have a lot to say about data security. You also will need to invite those that manage the platforms on which data is stored, because these folks will have a lot to say about how data is protected, and they will also allow you to identify where data is. For example, you may have SharePoint on premises, you may have SharePoint online, you may have Exchange and other email systems, you may have third-party storage, and so on. So you need to make sure that those stakeholders are invited. And also officers managing data governance and risk management solutions. And especially in the first part of the workshop, it will be ideal if you can have the CISO and the IT director or lead architect, somebody that can weigh in on the different trade-offs that need to be made. Because in the most extreme version of zero trust implementation for data security, you might end up saying people should only have access to sensitive data that they really need to do their jobs. And when they have access to that data, they will only be able to do what we think that they should be able to do. For example, nobody should be able to print a sensitive document, or nobody should be able to copy data from a sensitive document into another document. And those trade-offs may interfere with the business. So it's important that these roles, these high-up roles, are there to weigh in on the impact on the business and to decide on the application of certain policies where trade-offs might be needed or implied. Next slide. So this workshop is also a long one, especially the first section. The Know and Protect Your Data section is when you analyze the existence of sensitive data, you identify types of sensitive data, and you determine the right protection policies for each kind of data. And the reason why this is long is that unlike the devices pillar or the identity pillar, you cannot really generalize too much. Obviously, a large company might have millions or billions of documents. You're not going to review documents one by one, but you need to go through different categories of data, different types of documents. And this is kind of like a taxonomy that probably doesn't even exist at the company. Like, you don't have your documents categorized in different buckets. So you have to figure out how to rationalize your analysis. And we'll go into details on how you do that in a bit. But essentially, you're going to have to do an exercise of analyzing sensitive data. What is sensitive data? How you divide that? How you identify that? Which technology do you use to identify the different types of sensitive data? Where it is located? How it is protected? How it needs to be protected? And which policies apply to each? So that's going to be the lion's share of the workshop. Then you have to implement additional controls for data access, especially for admins to ensure like the default admin doesn't have full access to all the sensitive data in the whole company and that they can do whatever they want by implementing RBACs and administrative units and other tools. And then you will want to put special focus on your critical assets, your crown jewels, the stuff that you say this makes or break my company. Those might need additional protections, they might need additional consideration, and they need to be identified. So that last part is probably what's going to take a big chunk of the time in this last section of the workshop. One thing that is not accounted in these times is that you need to do a little bit of effort in the inventory side prior to the exercise, prior to the workshop. You need to identify, okay, here's my data. Here's where I have documents. Here's where I have sensitive documents. Here's where I consider sensitive. That needs to be done in a semi-structured fashion before starting the workshop. Otherwise, you have nothing to analyze. So that data collection process you'll have to do prior to initiating the workshop, or you might start the workshop, discuss what you're going to do, then do the data collection, and then continue with the workshop. Now, next slide. You may wonder how zero trust principles map to the data space. The mapping is a little bit less obvious than in the other pillars. What does verify explicitly means for data? It means that you need to identify different types of data and according to their sensitivity, how critical they are, how potentially harmful will be if they were disclosed. And you will need to define location independent control. So for example, if a document that contains this kind of thing is accessed, these people should be able to access and they should be able to do X, Y, Z. And that is what we call verify explicitly. Do not just grant access because the document, I don't know, all employees should have access to this data. Well, if that's true, then you need to enforce that only employees have access to the data. And if not all employees need to have access, you need to verify who they are, what roles they have, and what data they need to access. Least privilege adds on top of that to ensure that they can only do the tasks they are supposed to do. For example, as I said before, if nobody needs to print a document with customer PII, then that should be enforced. If nobody needs to transfer externally customer PII, same thing. And assume breach means that you need to take special protections for critical assets, like your critical research PII, exploration data, VIP customer PII, or whatever you consider that is the most impactful pool of data in your organization. And assume breach means make sure that even in the worst possible case, like you have the hackers inside your company accessing data, your servers are compromised, that data is still secure. And there are technologies to ensure that. Obviously, there is no such thing as hacker proof, but you can establish multiple layers of security to ensure that even if your data is compromised, which very probably some data will be compromised at some point, you are minimizing the impact of such compromise and you're ensuring that your data remains secure. Next slide, please. So the workshop for data is divided in 3 slides. Don't worry about the size of the font. We're going to zoom in a second. The first module is no one protect your data, then manage data access, and then the protection of critical assets. Next slide. So the no one protect your data, as I mentioned previously, is the most comprehensive and extensive part of the workshop. And it's focused mostly, I'm not going to go over each box, but it's focused mostly on figuring out what categories of data you have. For example, you may have regular customer PII. You may have critical customer PII. You may have health care information for your employees. You may have CAD drawings that reflect undisclosed products, or CAD drawings for known products that may also be sensitive. You may have regulated data, etc. And you need to identify those categories. You need to also identify how to detect each of those categories. Some might be detected manually by users telling you this is critical PII via a sensitivity label. Some might be detected via classifiers, and the Purview Suite offers you a bunch of different types of classifiers, such as sensitive information types, exact data matching, fingerprints, and so on. And you use those classifiers to detect the data. And in some cases, you might use combinations of techniques. Those detections will allow you to apply policies. So then you can say, well, anything that contains this kind of data is protected this way, or is labeled this way, or is controlled from flowing to the wrong locations this way. The guidance for each of those is quite extensively documented in each of these boxes. If you click on each of these boxes, it will take you to a website where you will see the guidance, and it will tell you what to do for each. You have the description of the tools to use, and you have the explanation of how to use them to achieve these different goals. One thing that is not that is different from the other workshops is that the other workshops have an assessment tool that you can use to collect data prior to the workshop. In the case of the data security, we don't provide you with that tool. There are components in the Purview Suite that allow you to collect data. For example, Content Explorer, and in particular Content Explorer PowerShell, allow you to collect information about all your data across your cloud services. But the challenge is that you may have on-premises data, and you may have data in other clouds, and you will have to figure out how to collect the data about your information in your environment, even though it might be a mixed environment. So you need to use the guidance that we provide to collect information, and this might require developing some queries, developing some tools, some filters. You have to figure out how you want to do that data collection, perform the analysis, and say, well, here is my sensitive data, here's what I want to protect. Next slide. So in the second part of the workshop, you will focus on the administrative access to data, and say, I'm going to implement RBAC to control who can access what, which admins can view. For example, if there is an alert about DLP, a user doing something with sensitive data, you may want to restrict certain administrators' ability to see the actual data, because that might be confidential, and you don't want to put it in front of every single person in your SOC, or every single person triaging different types of events. So you want to control that. You may also, in some companies, want to compartmentalize your company and create administrative units, and say, well, these administrators are the ones that are going to manage the rules and policies and events for the people in Germany, or the people in the R&D department, and so on. And so those are the kinds of controls that you establish during the data access. That's normally a little more straightforward process than the previous phase in the workshop. Next slide. And then protection of critical data assets. Even though this is a relatively simple process, because you just identify a smaller amount of data that you consider critical, and a smaller set of tools that are going to use to protect this data, things such as bring your own key, the double key encryption, and so on, you will want to analyze the impact of these tools quite heavily, because these are sometimes disruptive. For example, if you implement double key encryption, you are blocking any usage of any cloud-based tool on the data. That's by design, by intent. You are saying, I consider this piece of data so critical that I don't want Microsoft to process it. I want it to be completely opaque to anything that is not me, not my own people, my own services running on my own premises service, for example. So you want to analyze the impact, and you want to weigh in and say, well, which data really warrants that level of protection and opacity and loss of productivity, because obviously that's a consequence of losing services. So you will want to spend some time discussing the trade-offs and analyzing the impact for each category of data, and whether this level of protection is warranted. That's why this section might be a little bit longer than the previous one. Next. So just to wrap it up, I'm going to hand it back to Tarek, who will give some finishing words.
Thank you, Enrique, and thanks, David and Clay, my colleagues. We kind of wanted to talk about how you wrap up the workshop in general. So for each of these pillars, when you're done conducting the workshop with your team, and we did also want to call out that you can do this workshop with a partner. So if you have a partner, when you go to the website, you'll find that there's a link to a partner kit. So if you are yourself a partner, you can customize the workshop with the partner kit such that you can, for example, brand it with your own logos, or say this is the XYZ partner Microsoft workshop. And so, but if you are custom and you're working with a partner, so you can work with them on delivery as well. So basically you have a trusted partner that helps you with your devices, your identity, and so forth. You can work with them on this and they can help you fill it out and guide you through it. And then once you're done, one thing we didn't want to call out, that the reason we put it in a spreadsheet is actually because then you can extract the items themselves and actually put them in Jira or Azure DevOps or any other project management tool to start reporting on where you are, assigning tasks to people and so forth. So it's a very handy tool in that regard. I never knew you could do these things with Excel, but apparently you could. And then we do recommend that you rerun the workshop every 6 to 12 months to kind of measure where you are on a given pillar, right? So for that, let's say you did an identity workshop in March, maybe do another one near the end of the year to track where you're going, how far you've made progress, recognize where you're blocked, where you're not making enough progress. So this is just general, advice for any of the pillars, and then of course for the whole workshop as a whole. Okay, and then we come kind of to our closing call to action. I mean, obviously, encourage any of you, if you have any questions or follow-ups, please put them in the chat. We will pick them up. But we do want to remind you, please go to aka.ms/ZT workshop. Try out the website. Give us feedback. There's a feedback form on the website for the workshop itself and how it's working or not working. There's also an assessment tool that you can run at the beginning of the workshop. We recommend that you do it. So if you go to the website, you'll find that there is a component where you can actually download a PowerShell module or tool that can actually do some checks on your tenant, and it's designed to kind of help you start from a good baseline rather than go 6 levels deep into, oh, I want to deploy a super advanced conditional access policy, but I don't have MFA for my admins. So we're kind of trying to check some of these basic things before you go very deep. And so we do recommend you run the assessment tool. It does require obviously admin privileges. And then each of the pillars has more than just 8 minutes. You heard my colleagues give each of the pillars right here. We actually have a detailed video that walks you through each of the areas and how to deliver the workshop for yourself if you were just a customer, or for your customers if you were a partner. And so we do want you to kind of check out these resources. The assessment tool is also an open source tool on GitHub. So if you have feedback on that one, or if you see bugs, you want to find bugs, you can totally just open issues against it in GitHub, and we would try to address and fix things. So we're arrived at the end of our slides. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add anything. We have the references and links. Thank you, Bailey. We put them in the chat. So if anyone has any questions, if anyone wants to bring up anything, I don't know, colleagues, anyone want to bring up something or comment on something in the chat?
Well, as folks get their questions in, I'm happy to mention that we have a few exciting shows coming up as well in November. So on November 6th, we have a phishing resistant deployment guide with Michael Epping and Tim Larson, where we're going to be covering some of our new guides there, as well as some of those new deployment capabilities. I know that Michael Epping was our very first 425 show, especially with talking about platform SSO for Mac. So really great to have him back. And then on November 13th, we'll be talking about the importance of enabling risk-based conditional access with Rashi Kuka and Megan Walsh. So really excited for those shows. If you do have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat here. If you are one of the currently 76 attendees watching live, I do see a question from Jeff.
Yes.
Is there a plan to add the network and software pillars into this tool?
Good call out. Yes, so good call out. So the zero trust pillars are 6. We only have 3. It's not that we don't believe in the other 3. We are working on it, but we just wanted to launch something. So we do have network, infrastructure, and apps together. And then the third one is SecOps, or basically transparency, threat hunting, that kind of stuff. So they are in development. Network and SecOps are ahead. And so you should see us come up with them hopefully in the next 2 to 3 months. But we wanted to launch with something just because we have enough substance now that people can start. And then we also feel those 3 are the 3 we publish are the foundational ones. But network is important, of course. And so, yes, so stay tuned. But absolutely spot on.
Thank you for raising that. I think as well, one thing that our speakers wanted to emphasize is that if you do have feedback on this workshop or the different capabilities that they mentioned today, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I know that with these shows, we're trying to make them more and more collaborative. So feel free to pop a comment on YouTube, message them on LinkedIn, comment on one of our Entra community pages posts on LinkedIn about this show if you're interested. I believe those are all the questions that were submitted in the live Q&A for today. But if you do have future questions and you're watching this on the recording, feel free to reach out. Be sure to follow our LinkedIn page with Entra community channel, and then also subscribe to our Microsoft Security Community Channel YouTube page. If you're watching this live, the YouTube video should be up by end of day. So really exciting if you do want to share that out with a colleague. And thank you so much for joining us today, and looking forward to seeing y'all on future 425 show episodes.
Thank you all very much.